Hello all and welcome to my first political commentary video. I am Max. I am going to be discussing today the plight of the Afghanis. This was not necessarily the first video I wanted to start with. In truth, I was going to do this 2 weeks ago, but I had to get new internet and I had to figure out this whole setup, and I was going to do the Vaush Charlie Kirk debate. And I will still do that. It might be the next video or the video after that, but I think things have happened since then that I sort of have to talk about, and that is what has happened in Afghanistan. And I'm here because I've seen a lot of bad takes on both sides of the aisle, whoever you want to define that, pretty much from everybody. And it seems like a lot of people are missing the point. And so I felt like I had to make this video first. Even though it may be I don't want to be confrontational, although maybe slightly, a controversial topic. I might upset liberals, I might upset progressives, I might upset conservatives, socialists, communists, fascists will certainly be upset by whatever I say. So let's not even talk about them. So I'm going to do a sort of interesting format for this. My next two videos will probably be, I'll be a bit more, I'll do a little more pre-watching and direct research here. I've just been keeping track of the events. I know U.S. domestic policy a lot more than foreign policy, but certainly in places like Afghanistan, Iran, North Korea, China, Russia, all these places where we have all these disputes and conflicts and where there's the hot spots of geopolitics, I do tend to know more about those places just because I tend to read more about them and watch more things about them. So I'm going to do something a little interesting here. We're going to watch 3 videos here. I think we're going to try 1.25 speed. If people don't like it, we can slow it down, but I'm going to try to talk quickly. I'm going to try to have them get through the arguments quickly. And that's how we're going to do it. And I haven't watched these videos. We're going to go one from 3 days ago, another from 2 days ago, and one from yesterday. And you can see maybe how the information's evolving, how the Taliban, we're seeing their promises versus their action. What we're seeing about Biden and his deflection, Trump's disavowal, George W. Bush in the background, all these things. I'm not exactly sure what takes we're going to see, but we're going to do 3. We're going to have my friends at the Majority Report. Of course, we're not friends. I don't know them, but I like them. Emma Vigeland and Sam Cedar, Epic Sam Cedar. We're going to have our friend, again, I don't know him, Dylan Burns, who knows a lot about foreign policy. That's the one that so, but first, before that, we're going to have Dylan Burns and Vaush from 2 days ago, and the one with the other one with Dylan is going to be with Hunter Avallone, who's a pretty interesting figure. I'm sure we'll get into him a little bit, or we may not. You can look him up. So first things first. What if we stayed in Afghanistan for another 20 years?
Folks, I don't know if you've seen the horrible images coming out of the Kabul airport as the Taliban have basically all but taken over all of Afghanistan, and maybe not even all but. President of Afghanistan in exile now. The Taliban has declared that the Afghanistan war is over. And months ago, when Joe Biden announced this, I think I made a point at that time to say that this is going to be incredibly ugly. And I don't know that people anticipated, or even that I anticipated, that it would be this ugly on day one. But it's going to get uglier too. And this was
from what I understand, the intelligence agencies knew that the Taliban was likely to take over. Biden has admitted that there was always going to be chaos. He admitted that after the fact. Before, he made all these weird assertions that things would go well somehow. So that's happened more recently.
Inevitability. And if anything, it shows the folly of our presence there. was a house of cards. And we got word of this a couple of years ago during the Trump administration. And that was in the release, I should say, of the Afghanistan papers, which made it quite clear that the military, that our politicians have been lying about any successes in that country for well over a decade, close to 2 decades of just lying to the American public.
Okay, that is true. But it's a very strange assertion to say that the American government, the U.S. government, messed this up completely and we shouldn't be there. Dempsey was alive then. I remember this too. I'm 33. 9/11 happened. And the terrorists were trained and harbored by the Taliban in Afghanistan. And typically when we're attacked and thousands of people die, our response is this is no longer a personal foreign issue of a country with a bad government. This is now our issue. So the idea that we shouldn't have invaded Afghanistan, I just don't know what else we should have done. What was the other option? And I don't really hear progressives and lefties who are saying this, or libertarians who are saying this, and giving really what the other option was. They're acting like 9/11 didn't happen, like there was no... I mean, Iraq, there was no reason, but of course in Afghanistan. And once we do intervene, as with Germany, as with Japan, as with any other nation, you know, we don't do what we did after World War I and destroy the country and take all their money, like with Germany after World War I. We do it like after World War II. We give them the ability to make a good life for themselves. Now, of course, I think we can even do better than that. We don't just, we gave them capitalism and they moved on from that. But they also have those problems that were installed. And of course, capitalism existed in Germany before, and to a certain extent in Japan before. But the idea that the Afghan people can't get democracy, can't get liberalism because they're just inherently, culture or something is inherently corrupt. It's just ridiculous. If we had given them the circumstances, if we had given them progressive policies, a non-corrupt government that wouldn't just collude with American-based multinational corporations to exploit the Afghan people and their resources, if we had really given our effort, we could have turned an invasion into the Afghan people being glad we're there and a new democratic government. And that's what could have happened. So the idea that there was no way to do anything is just absurd. It's been done before. There have been occupied countries that have recovered. You just have to give them a chance. And, as the Afghan papers and all this other crap, we clearly didn't. So the idea that we shouldn't be there is wrong. The idea is that we had to be there. And since we had to be there, we should have given them a real democracy, a rule by the people, democracy. Freaking A, man. Like, give them an actual government. Like, the Taliban was able to just roll over these troops because the government had nothing to defend. It had no liberty to defend it. There were some liberties given by the U.S., but they had no real democracy to defend. So why would they lay down their lives? Why would they put up arms? Why would they fight against the Taliban? And then the idea that nothing's been accomplished in 20 years. Okay, I have a lot of problems with America, but the American culture of liberties and female empowerment and not, throwing gays off roofs. Education, all these things, all these liberalizations. True, we installed a corrupt government so we could, as a mirror of our own corrupt government, so we could continue our exploitation of this country and make some money off of this invasion. But there's still some good things that happen. And the idea that the Taliban can just come in and say, oh, we're going to go back to how it was in 2000, 2001 is absurd. One, the Arab Spring happened. People in the Middle East remember this, even though we don't. This desire for democracy is in people's hearts. It's in people's minds, even if they don't necessarily speak about it all the time. And so the Taliban, if they're going to continue to rule, I think they're going to have to make concessions. Now, they're already killing people and summarily executing people, and there's all these issues and firing female news anchors. But, you know, I think they at least gave the sense that they were actually going to care about the Afghan people. Are they going to do things that actually help the Afghan people? Are they incredibly misguided? No, probably, and yes, definitely. But things have changed, and you can't, unspill milk. You can't. The Pandora's box is open in Afghanistan. You can't just go back to how the Taliban was. The Taliban's changed. Afghan people have changed. And this progressive idea that, nothing came of it, exactly the same, is absurd.
And no one wanted to be the guy, I mean, it's all been men, who wanted to have these images on the day that the American military left. And that's why it didn't happen before now. Now, that said, Donald Trump, and we will play this later in the show, made it quite clear that he wanted credit for ending this. Months ago, maybe close to a year ago now, the Trump administration made a deal with the Taliban to release 5,000 Taliban prisoners so that there would be less conflict there as a way of protecting Donald Trump's bid to be reelected. Many of those prisoners are now in the leadership of the Taliban. I don't know that that made a material difference for what we've seen in the pace of the fall. I think
it did not. We found out later there was an agreement with the Taliban and the military. They promised amnesty, and the military said, "Okay, we're not going to fight." So didn't matter.
With some notion that the Taliban would take over the entire country and not Kabul. But again, this was all just sort of built on a foundation of sand. It was all a house of cards, however you want to express it. It's been a delusion. And it's a delusion that is being propagated by not only by the military, not only by some of our politicians, but also our media. Check out this clip of Jake Tapper. Just completely, and we're seeing this across the board, right? This massive failure for Joe Biden. The failure already existed. It was
a failure of United States imperialism.
Yes, the failure has been there for decades. And
war on terror,
the war on terror. I mean, there's multiple different ways you could slice this, right? You could have said that. You could say that it was a failure to invade Afghanistan from the beginning,
instead of maybe Saudi Arabia.
Anywhere.
Not invading anywhere, but for Saudi Arabia's involvement in 9/11, we invaded Afghanistan.
But bin Laden was in Afghanistan.
And then within weeks, we were able to get a surrender option from the Taliban.
Taliban said that they would be willing to hand over bin Laden. Failure point number one. Failure point number two was to accept the surrender of the Taliban once you've invaded. Failure point number three was to leave all of your forces, to leave all of your resources, to pull them out of Afghanistan. Instead of building institutions, instead of building some type of form, and I don't know if we could have done it, but certainly we weren't going to do it once the decision was made, which may have been made even before we went into Afghanistan, that we were going to pull all those resources from Iraq.
So Sam is making an excellent point here, and I have to say that Emma is making a terrible point. There were maybe people in Saudi Arabia that might have had something to do with it. The hijackers were Saudi Arabian, but that doesn't mean we should then invade Saudi Arabia. There's no clear link that the government was planning it or training people. We know that the Taliban was literally training these people and harboring Osama bin Laden, the leader of the people who hijacked the planes that crashed in those buildings. There's a clear difference.
Then the failure was by the Obama administration to come in and realize this is a disaster. Are we going to put good money after bad, as it were? And it turned out we're going to put good money after bad.
Cost fallacy.
Well, at that point, Obama said that was the good war, right?
That was the good war. But when he got into office, he could have said, you know what? It turns out the good war is not working. But instead, that good money is just a euphemism for killing more civilians, losing more U.S. lives, and kicking the can down the road. Trump did the same exact thing. God knows what would have happened in May if he had been reelected, if he would have held, actually followed through.
That would have created a government that would not have been so susceptible to kleptocracy and to the Taliban taking over so swiftly. It's an indictment of the premise that the United States' imperialist wars do anything except destroy, that we saw this fold so immediately. If the United States wanted to occupy a nation for 20 years, and I disagree with that wholeheartedly, they could have spent that money on creating a government and structures and investments that wouldn't have led to this. But we didn't do that. We used that money to enrich defense contractors.
So why are you spending all your time protesting us leaving instead of protesting for us helping? Why are you not making that the number one thing you say, that we could have helped, as opposed to saying there was no hope from the beginning? Why are you making arguments that don't align with your conclusions?
It was a very profitable war. Afghanistan was just collateral damage for the looting of U.S. taxpayer dollars to go directly to Lockheed Martin and other defense contractors, Boeing, etc. So that's what this was. And it was a war of lashing out after 9/11. Bin Laden was located there. So Afghanistan, which already had faced the brunt of U.S. imperialism decades before, of course, just collateral damage. And then now the media, which supported those efforts decade after decade, turns around and say, well, what about the women and children of Afghanistan? What about people there? Yes, that's what we've been saying the whole time.
Okay, I just want to bring up, if we have time.
No, you haven't. You've been saying, let's leave, let's leave, let's leave. That's all you've been saying. And maybe occasionally, oh, we could maybe help.
How much, we're talking about if we're going to learn any lessons. This is the concept of the decent interval from Vietnam. Decent interval is a theory regarding the end of the Vietnam War, which argues that from 1971 or 1972, the Nixon administration abandoned the goal of preserving South Vietnam and instead aimed to save face by preserving a decent interval between withdrawal and South Vietnamese collapse. Therefore, Nixon could avoid becoming the first United States president to lose a war. Like, this seems to be like the main thing we're preoccupied in
Absolutely.
Is to how do we save face when we retreat.
Absolutely. This is why Obama should have done this 10 years ago.
The North Vietnamese government, I wish I knew more about this, but from what I understand, the North Vietnamese government was inspired by the Revolutionary War, saw themselves as founding a new type of government. The Taliban, on the other hand, are regressive, superstitious, hyper-conservative. It's really a very different situation. The people pretty much got behind North Vietnam taking over. We have a somewhat communist, mixed capitalist system in Vietnam today, and it's actually been a fairly successful country. The Taliban, if taking over, is not pointing Afghanistan in a positive direction in any sense. At least from everything we know. From maybe what they're saying, if they're telling the truth, they could maybe be not terribly terrible, but they'll still probably be terrible. And now look at Sam Cedar stare into your soul. The ultimate Chad. Steven Crowder's nightmare. Okay, moving on. Now, Vaush. Sam Cedar, great guy. He said the N-word once, but who cares? He's a sweetheart. And Dylan Burns, young guy. One thing I really wanted to watch this video for is I find that Dylan really has a sense of foreign policy. He does a lot of reading and research into foreign policy. And then Vaush is Vaush. He's very entertaining. He's kind of an edgelord. He said some really stupid stuff. He's like a hardline consequentialist, which is like a really weird position to take. But I think he's a good conversator, and we'll see what him and Dylan have to say.
How you doing? I'm doing okay. The news is quite sad, but I'm doing my best to keep my chin up and try to think of the best things. Try to keep my mind on positive thoughts. But I mean, I did recently declare that I have the tools to defeat the Taliban single-handedly. I have offered to the U.S. government that they can airdrop me into Kabul at any time. I will sit down. I will walk up to leadership and say, Taliban, more like Talibad, and then they're fucked. So at any point, they can drop me into Kabul.
Pardon
A pretty
the
devastating
pardon the
joint
cursing.
operation forces with Marion Williamson's proposal to send in the podcasters. Did you see that?
Oh, I can believe
I
that.
did see that. I was thinking
Send Jimmy. I think she's got a good idea. Send Jimmy Dore to Afghanistan. I think it's brilliant in its simplicity.
Did you see Tom Cotton and Mitch McConnell's statements about Afghanistan?
Didn't Mitch McConnell do the whole like regrettable but Biden's fault shtick? I didn't see Tom Cotton.
So Tom Cotton has basically said he said like a day or two ago,
It's
like
unfortunate
they're at
we
the
don't
gates of
get
Afghanistan,
to
bomb them to hell. Like he thought that maybe
Dylan's face in
somehow
this
we
as
were
well,
going to
'cause we just have to watch
bomb them all and then redeploy massive amounts of
Vaush.
troops to push them all back. And seeing Tom Cotton say that, even though he is more of the right-wing populist, was really interesting. Mitch McConnell then went on to say something pretty similar. And I just found it interesting that under Trump, even though we all know that pulling out of Afghanistan polls at 66 to 70% among the American populace, and saying I'm pro-war, let's be pro-war, is a very unpopular thing to do. Right when they're not in a position of power, then they switch base because no one wants to be the politician who actually
this handsome
stops
guy.
a withdrawal.
Yeah, of
from
course, because
Afghanistan.
Trump was a fucking beta bitch boy. Trump talked a big game about pulling soldiers out and ending the
His
war,
lefty
but he and
locks
everyone else
will
who had
save us
anything
all.
even approximating access to White House intel knew that if you did that, the Taliban would resurge and would be optically bad. So he kicked his feet the same way Obama did. But Chad Biden actually whipped one out and pulled out of Afghanistan. For better or for worse, he actually committed to it, which is more than Trump's fans could ever say.
Well, I will. The thing that I find interesting is I think that Trump is just somebody who doesn't have like a consistent like foreign policy like belief. He doesn't have like foundational beliefs like at any way. So, in 1 week he'll be like dropping Moabs on Afghanistan, and the next week he'll be negotiating with the Taliban. 1 week he'll say we need to bomb the families of terrorists. Next week he's inviting the Taliban to Camp David for the anniversary of 9/11
and releasing all the Taliban officials. Isn't the person
and many
who
of
took
them
Kabul, he was released by Trump.
Yeah.
Trump's foreign policy is consistent of someone who has narcissistic personality disorder, so I guess that could be considered a philosophy. Whatever aggrandizes him, whatever appears to most aggrandize him in each moment.
Yes, he was released in 2018 at the after they advised Pakistan to do so for negotiations. Yes,
which is pretty wild. Funnily enough, one of the best takes that I saw on this whole damn thing was from Dan Crenshaw. Didn't he?
That, and he does like the idea of like fascism just becoming more popular because maybe he thinks that'll like give him a better chance to take over.
I'm trying to find the statement right now, but didn't he say something that's quite correct? He said, for all the finger pointing and both sidesing here, that what happened right now would have been the inevitable consequence if any administration had pulled out. This is really a problem with the broader war machine and not with any particular politician's behavior.
Now, odds are that we would see something similar to this.
So, if we have a war machine and we're not doing anything about it, isn't it kind of the politicians' behaviors of not doing anything about it we have to worry about?
Maybe it would have been more lengthy opposition to the Taliban if we were able to do it in a different manner. This is not exactly my withdrawal. I definitely think it should have been done differently. I think this has been botched since the start. But I think something like this would have happened. The thing that I think 100% shouldn't be happening is the amount of chaos that's going on when it comes to the amount of refugees at Kabul airport who are literally falling from planes as they cling on for dear life because we haven't admitted enough of them as actual refugees to come to the United States. Biden was like bragging about 2,000 in his speech. He was bragging about it. When some NGOs are talking about 88,000 needed to being brought to the United States, and he's bragging about 2,000.
Yeah,
so
he's kind of Biden is being kind of a dishonest fuck about this. I think that like strategically, the fact that we it's really bad optically how we pull out of Afghanistan, but that we send people back in to help facilitate some withdrawal from Kabul. It's kind of the suggestion there is that like we dragged our feet, but then we weren't actually ready for how quickly the Taliban would overwhelm the 20 years of supplemental defenses that we've propped up to keep them away, and then like desperately trying to like run back there to shore up the last second withdrawal. We probably should have gone like pull the troops back to the capital city and then like stayed there for a month while facilitating as much transportation.
We should have realized that we had installed basically and fostered a government that the Afghani army had no reason to protect.
I will say that
I believe the president of Afghanistan, or the former president of Afghanistan, ran away with about $168 million, and this was the president they were supposed to lay down their lives for.
I'll say that a lot of this is probably due to the fact that analysts got the entirety of the situation incorrect. I mean, at first it was, well, it could fall in 6 months to the Taliban. Then it was like, wow, all these provincial. I mean, the first provincial capital fell a week and a half ago.
Mhm.
There's over 30-something provincial capitals, and the first one fell only a week and a half ago. A week and a half later, Kabul falls. I mean, Kandahar fell only like what, 4 days ago?
To be
And that's the
fair,
second biggest city.
did you expect Kabul to fall this quickly?
No, no one did.
Yeah,
Literally
no,
no one did. When they said,
should've.
when
Like,
people said
a week.
90 days, when I heard the statement, it'll fall in 90 days, I'm like, yeah, right, okay, buddy. And then it didn't even take 90 days. It took like 3.
No, it took no time at all. I mean, we were like, they caught us on our heels. We were still running out of the capital when the Taliban started marching in. It was incredible.
So this right here, I've said this for a very long time, and people get really angry at this statement because they think it's coping, but it's 100% true.
Mhm.
Lefties, when they say, "Hey, let's leave this country," or "Let's leave that country," or "Let's get out of there. Let's just pick up all our shit and leave," you need to then answer the question, how? How is
Thank
a really
you.
important question, because you don't want to make sure that the last little impact your country has on this country you've been engaged military for the last 20 fucking years makes the situation even worse, either for the refugees that you want to accept or for the local population. It could cause more chaos on the ground, cause more conflict on the ground. I mean, I don't think anybody can really tell me that right now it's a massive success when refugees are falling from planes.
You know the Malcolm X analogy about how America needs to acknowledge the dagger it buried in the back of Black Americans?
Uh-huh.
I feel like you could extend that analogy when it comes to harm done to a group of people that you're trying to make amends for. That there are different ways you can pull out that knife. You know, like with regards to Afghanistan. You know, there's the way that a trained team of surgeons might remove a knife, and then there's the way that like a drunken, shaky-handed person who passes out at the sight of blood might remove a knife. And one of those is a hell of a lot more harmful.
Caution is
And what we're doing right now in
analogies.
Afghanistan is demonstrative of just how bad of a. You'd think after 20 years we would have had some kind of strong, consistent, like preset measures for withdrawal, not a plan or a timeline
We've
necessarily.
been negotiating a withdrawal for 3 years.
Yeah, but
includes
like
the Trump administration.
a better idea than this. I mean, something like, hey, you know, if the Taliban start
Like
marching
a
in and they take like,
contingency
you know,
plan
the
if the
sort of
Taliban
provincial
take
capitals,
over
that we need to go
quickly,
into Kabul, we need to
maybe?
facilitate
Like,
the removal
plan
of
to
people from the
bring
embassy and get these.
refugees?
But we didn't even have that. We just left.
sorry,
And I don't know how
basically,
much of this
Vaush was
Biden
saying the
has
same thing.
direct control over, because I know it's a pretty complicated sort of joint effort between him and the nuances of, you know, the generals and how well they can actually coordinate with the people on the ground. But this feels almost like a worst case scenario.
I find it very hard to believe, and Biden accepted all responsibility, so I
Okay.
feel like we can place the responsibility on him. He said the buck stops here, and if he's admitting that, then I'm like, okay, well, we know who to point the finger at here for how bad it's going with the refugees right now, because he was bragging about the 2000, and if he's going to brag about it, then whose responsibility do we place that upon? If he's going to brag about it and say the buck stops here, then he is the person that we need to place responsibility upon. Now he can also place responsibility on Trump for the negotiations with the Taliban not going very well, for him not being able to get a ceasefire beforehand.
Okay, though, if like Caitlyn Jenner comes out and she says, "I accept responsibility for the situation in Afghanistan," then because she said it, we have to believe her. We have to say so. Biden just saying he's the reason. Then we just go with it.
Meaning that during the withdrawal, all this violence was happening, that I would have loved a deal, and this was a deal that this is a bunch of shoulda, coulda, woulda, so it doesn't even matter anymore.
Yeah.
But I think a deal where we actually had a ceasefire before our exit out of the country would have been something that I think would have been better
that would have been
before
nice.
withdrawal. That would have been something I could push. Now, somebody can tell me that's wishful thinking, right? But I think the amount of leverage we actually had in 2017 and 2018 is more significant than many people would let
Yeah,
on.
because we existed there primarily as a deterrent. The Taliban knew that if they marched in and started actively like fighting with our garrison troops, that we could level the mountains that they lived in, and that Americans would support it. You know, there's really nothing that our politicians like more than a really good excuse to bomb the Taliban. So they stay at bay. I mean, we could have secured, I feel like, at least a couple of months of a buffer time. Maybe they even would have broken the treaty, but fuck, at least we could have gotten, you know, our asses out of there and the people who are connected to us and facilitated a somewhat more reasonable transition. This reminds me of every other bit of diplomacy that the Trump team bragged about so much during his term.
Well, the thing is,
One thing about this is they're basically saying, well, the end of this war is let's take all the people who believe in democracy and we're trying to help the Afghan people. Let's just take them out of the country, and what could happen? You know, we'll just let the rest of them just have no one to fight for them.
I don't know.
North Korea too. It's like, look, they shook hands. Look, Trump's building bridges with our enemies, and then like nothing happened. You know?
Well, the thing is, what did happen is Donald Trump like stopped military drills with the South Korean government and gave a bunch of concessions, then negotiated and said basically,
Nothing good
so do you want a McDonald's and we'll take all your nukes? And then of course Kim Jong Un said
Want
no,
some
and then
international
boom, it ended.
legitimacy by having a photo op with the U.S. president and making essentially no concessions. Yeah.
Didn't make any sense. But when it comes to like, I don't think we could have like bombed them into submission or anything, or like deployed more troops to like take over the countryside. I don't think the deployment of more troops would have been politically viable. I don't think Biden or Trump really would have wanted to do that late term. But Trump was dropping literally the mother of all bombs, the Moab, and bragging about it early term in Afghanistan. So it's so weird for him to be doing that. Obviously, if you're looking at from like a Trumpian art of the deal type framework, I guess, if you actually believe that nonsense, then the idea was that he was trying to build up leverage in negotiations, I guess, by bombing the shit out of Afghanistan. You can see a spike in drone strikes. And then he used the leverage to do what? Nothing. He got basically what we would have gotten even in one of our weakest positions in Afghanistan, which was basically an agreement that agreed to nothing other than we will not actively shoot you Americans.
Well, that was his entire presidency. Everything good that his supporters promised they would give us was done at the cost of something immediate and tangible. And they kept saying, "Oh no, something good will come from this." We saw this with the tariffs. We saw this with the emphasis on bringing manufacturing back, which yielded essentially nothing. We saw this with Iran. We saw this with North Korea. And they tell us, "Oh yeah, but look, like we're building bridges. You know, this is going to pay off, blah blah." And then of course it doesn't. But by then they
Here's something interesting. I think intelligence chief or something like that said that if America hadn't kept to the agreement to leave, there would have been an onslaught from the Taliban. So, how does that exactly work? Biden says we haven't gotten to the stage where the government is strong enough to resist the Taliban, hence we're extending our stay for another year. And then the Taliban attacks, and then we bomb the crap out of them, and they lose. I mean, I think we have to ask for more.
they've moved on to a new set of talking points. By then, it's BLM or trans people in the
I think
bathrooms
you have
or
to
Antifa, and
demand
they don't have
more.
to take accountability for any of that. I'm not trying to shovel all the blame here onto Trump. This is pretty definitively a bipartisan problem. Obama had 8 years to ameliorate the situation in Afghanistan. It didn't. At least didn't as well as he could have. Didn't as well as I think we all know he could have. So this is just American empire building, or whatever the opposite of it is, I guess.
Yeah. Can I read you a quick little interview with an Afghan pilot?
I don't know. Depends. Will it make us sad?
Very sad, yes.
All right.
Okay. This is just to highlight, I think, the importance of taking in refugees, because this is I've seen like a lot of like dialogue from people like, well, the ANA were just like all their soldiers were just weak and stupid, and they all just crumbled because they were incompetent and foolish or stuff like that. And I just wanted to read this quick. And this is a question to the Afghan pilot who was fighting for 15 years for the ANA. Anything you want the American public to know? Many Afghan soldiers died bravely. I've been fighting for over 15 years. We did not all just give up and quit. Yes, some did. Once the Americans left, we weren't ready to start doing all the logistics, the maintenance, and the corruption really hurt us. I know people in the U.S. are upset that we didn't fight longer, but we've been fighting for decades, and some of us even longer. When the U.S. left, it really affected morale, especially how quickly it happened. We woke up one day, then Bagram was gone. Everyone got scared. It got out of control. I'm mad at many of the senior leaders who lined their pockets and simply vanished from the country. However, thousands of Afghan officers were not responsible for that. We were simply doing the best we could. There are a lot of Afghans who trusted the United States, not just translators, not just civil society activists, but also Afghan soldiers. We love fighting alongside the Americans. Please don't leave us behind. Please, we will be great Americans.
Yeah, I do think that hits on a really important point, which is that while it is true that the ANA buckled almost comedically quickly, that seems to have been largely a logistical problem. Like, because a military is almost nothing without a strong network of officers and lines of communication to maintain contact and keep morale high and make sure everyone knows what they're fighting for. It seems like we gave them a ton of guns and like vehicles, but the upper leadership of the ANA and of the government in general were just worthless, just absolutely incapable of keeping the frame together. The soldiers may have been brave, but that doesn't mean shit if there's somebody behind them. It's just how soldiers work.
There's been reports about food problems, and then there's reports about payment problems. There's reports about
we were saying we were spreading democracy, but what we were actually trying to spread was exploitative capitalism. I mean, this one guy says they fought. I've heard reports otherwise that there was a deal already made with the Taliban. I don't think everyone in the Afghan army feels the same way about America. It's so gung-ho. We love America. Stay. You've killed a bunch of our civilians even though you didn't have to, and you've taken all our wealth and we're still all poor and destitute, but we love you, stay. It's like, I guess they're that afraid of the Taliban. Can we really rely on the fear of something without providing anything else?
Some soldiers only have 15 to 30 bullets, meaning they
Jesus.
don't even have like more than like a single clip.
It's the
to actually-
Eastern Front, Soviet Russia sending them west. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and not to mention the fact that, of course, corruption in the ANA is not a new story. Even this Afghan pilot talks about it. Like, corruption was a major issue. There's, of course, the Afghanistan papers, and many others highlighted the issue of ghost soldiers, which existed in Afghanistan and also existed to a large extent in Iraq. It was part of the reason why ISIS was able to take Mosul, was because what would happen is a lot of these like commanders, they would have this list of all these people that were fighting for them, and the generals look at this list and they say, we have 10,000 soldiers guarding this position. We're great, we're wonderful. But what really happened is they actually have maybe 2,000, because 8,000 of those soldiers are not real. They are commanders of these units actually take out
And I wonder why they're having trouble recruiting.
this list. They make up a bunch of names, or they'll say a bunch of people that are not actually working for them or fighting for them, get their paychecks for those soldiers and pocket it. Or the other thing they'll do is that they'll get somebody, give them half of their paycheck, say, you actually don't even need to fight for us, go home, you get half the paycheck, don't need to do shit. They'll take the other half of the paycheck and pocket it. It was grifting of the highest extent, and not only did it sacrifice the national security in Afghanistan, but national security in Iraq, and was part of the reason why ISIS was able to take over the country so quickly.
Yeah, it seems like a logistical nightmare. I know that there were also training issues as well. You saw, I assume you're familiar with the those reports that came out about U.S. soldiers being instructed to not interfere with like the child abuse that was taking place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing was that the Afghan government did not have the authority.
But I do want to say that the reason I was saying that earlier with regards to them all looking like a bunch of young, like, rowdy dipshits is because I think there are a lot of people who are buying this narrative that the Taliban today is kind of like reformed or modern. I know the Taliban has put out some statements on how they're like super duper going to respect women's rights, but even if
42 years ago,
Yeah.
millions of Iranian women were told that, oh, you know what? From Taliban spokespeople and Khamenei and all these different people, whether it be the Iranian government or the Taliban, they were telling them, hey, you know what? Women's rights is going to be okay. Don't worry about it now that the Soviets are gone. And the Iranian government's like, hey, don't worry about it now that the dirty Western imperialists are gone. Everything's going to be fine for women's rights. They say this every fucking time.
Yeah.
They're going to rule this like they've ruled. Europe did take in a lot more refugees than we did.
Oh, yeah.
But I will be pleasantly surprised. The Iranian government's like, hey, don't worry about it now that they're...
So, in a way, they're not lying, because in their mind, like, a hijab is women's rights, because it's, like, good for women. So they don't think they're oppressing women. They think they're, like, the champions of women's rights. So really, when they say we're going to protect women's rights, you have to just look at what they believe women should do, and that's what they're really talking about.
Now that the dirty Western imperialists are gone, everything's going to be fine for women's rights. They say this every fucking time.
Yeah.
They're going to rule this like they've ruled every time before in any province they've ever held. They're not going to 180 this shit. Now, if they do, I will be pleasantly surprised. But that's like telling me the Nazis are going to start like a Jewish Appreciation Day. I find it very hard to believe until I see it actually take place. Here's a great example.
Mm-hmm.
There's this university. I forget. I think it's called Herat.
I just looked up Iran. There are 17 women in parliament out of 290. Terrible, but there are women in parliament, and 49% of the workforce is women. So, well, I don't know.
I forget the exact name of their university. It's actually a great university because 60% of the people at the university actually are women, which is like actually really cool. And Taliban soldiers have been turning women away now that they've captured the province, saying that, oh, you can't really go to school right now. Goodbye. And they're starting to turn them away. Now, this was brought up to a Taliban spokesperson who was saying, yes, women will get education. Yes, women will work. Yes, women will be Yas queens. Good sir. And then they ask about this instance. They just dodge the question. They don't address it whatsoever. This is purely for the cameras. It's because the thing is, the Taliban know that if people knew what was going on, people may have more interest in like paying attention to Taliban crimes.
Well, this is also what I mean about the Charlottesville comparison. And I'm, of course, making comparisons to things to which I'm most familiar.
So, have they reformed? No. Have they changed? Have they gotten better in some ways? Duh. And they're not really acknowledging that. But yeah, it sounds I kind of go with Dylan's opinion here that I've really not felt any confidence in the Taliban. I mean, I think he's going to say he's hopeful in some level, or he's going to have a grain of sand of hope. But yeah, I think that's where we are right now. But then the question is, why do so many people join the Taliban? Why do so few people join the Afghan military? You know, why did they surrender so quickly? And the Taliban may be taking all these things away from them, but maybe they're giving a sense of autonomy. Maybe they're giving a hope that the Taliban might put some of the wealth of Afghanistan back in the Afghanis' pocket.
Familiar. I've never argued with the Taliban insurgent, or in fact any Islamo-fascist, but you know, if you argue with some of these like alt-right types, you'll be like, hey, you'll respect women and Jewish people, right? And they'll give you a big ear-to-ear grin, and they'll go, yeah, you know, we just want to protect white people's rights. And it's so obvious, but it feels like it fools enough people every time they do it that it starts the discourse again.
I think people want to be, the thing is, I think a lot of people right now want to believe the most positive possible scenario. People want to believe that there was no problems with the withdrawal. People want to believe that that everything in Afghanistan is going to be okay, and people want to believe that everything's peaches and cream. They don't want to accept the hard truth, and the hard truth of the matter is the withdrawal was not as peachy as we thought it was going to, as many people thought it was going to be. That the government collapsed a lot faster than it was expected by basically every single expert. Even pro-Taliban people probably wouldn't have thought it would happen this fast, and that the rights of women and minorities in Afghanistan are going to take a big back foot to this dictatorship.
I think that the longer the Taliban are left with almost singular control over Afghanistan, the more likely it'll be that there will be some kind of insurgent infighting. I was talking about this with my stream, but I feel like at some point there's probably going
You
to
just deploy Mike from PA.
to unify them or to exacerbate the split.
No, to like make them like divide.
Oh, I was thinking it could be like the Caliph, you know?
This.
Ideas. So he's already like not a super hard line in the sand type guy. It's weird that he would be so like hardliner on this. But I think this is really demonstrative, you know? This really shows how many people wanted out of Afghanistan because they wanted to reduce American imperialism and improve the lives of the people there, and how many of them wanted to get out just because they're American isolationists. And I think this is incredibly revealing as to which like group people are falling in, because I am seeing some downright fucking despicable attitudes towards the suffering of the Afghan people, who I thought were part of the international proletariat. I mean, I assumed they were under our collective interest here, but apparently not.
The thing is, I feel like for a lot of people, these are inconvenient facts, because for the last 20 years, many of them have wanted us to leave the country and not invade in the first place. And now that we are going to invade, there's a lot of things that for Afghan women that have improved in the last 20 years. Their literacy rate has increased by over 100%. There's many things that have happened with Afghan women that are like 40. It was I think it's like 40% of the government are women now, or 30 to 40% of the government was women. It was massive increases of them joining to get into education and other things, into the workforce. And these now, for a lot of Americans, these don't sound like maybe like amazing statistics when you talk about them. Oh, like the idea of like women being able to get an education or women being able to like go to work. Like that doesn't feel like a big thing to American, because we've had that as something in the United States for, you know, about 80 to 100 years.
And yet I've heard the take, nothing was accomplished in 20 years. It's like, you can't, it's that sort of liberalization isn't just going to go away. It's not, people know now what life can be like.
For a lot of this, or to 120 to 140 years. But that isn't something that has been in Afghanistan for more than like 20 years. That is something that is legitimately on the chopping block. And when it came to Taliban negotiations with the government, and the indications from the Afghan populace that the vast majority of them support women's rights, they would never be able to, they weren't accepting women's rights in any negotiations with the ANA. And that's because they are an anti-feminist organization. It is hardline in their ideology. They're extremists. They can't accept that.
Yeah, if nothing else, it's really funny that all the people who weren't even Bernie Bus during the last election are falling hardline with Biden's position. You know, pull out, no concessions. Is it my fault that rights are failing in that country? Nope. Like, in this one gleaming moment in time, they are mirroring Biden's performative lack of responsibility over what's taking place over there. So I guess that's funny, if nothing else.
It's freaking disgusting. Like, the idea that we can just ignore the plight of people because they're not within our borders. I mean, there are things we can do. It has to start with us reforming here, because if we're rotten, then everything that we touch will turn rotten too. But if we can reform here, if we can make America a better place, a more progressive place, then we can start spreading those values elsewhere. And then people have something to protest for, something to fight for again. And we do too as Americans.
Yeah. Is there any more questions you wanted to throw my way? Any last things?
How long do you think it's going to be before other countries pick up the power vacuum that we left open? Like China, I know they were talking about introducing Afghanistan to the Belt and Road Initiative after America announced its pullout. It seems to me like countries just can't resist getting involved in Afghanistan. If there was any country that could actually conquer it, China seems like the most likely candidate.
They're not.
Conquer economically. Conquer is in exert economic.
I don't believe China is going to deploy troops in Afghanistan. Now, they do. There is a possible scenario where it could happen, but I think it's like extremely unlikely. I think that there's been countries that have been deploying troops on the border, not for like reasons of like invading, but because it's a very destabilized situation right now. Obviously, a lot of nations want stability to like take place. China also has the interests, of course, of the instability in the Xinjiang region that they believe is that they're like, we have a lot of instability in Xinjiang. We got to do these internment camps. That could be like to them, it could be a national security concern. So that is like the one like scenario where I could think of, but I don't think they're going to deploy troops, but they do have economic reasons to get involved. I think, of course, Pakistan historically has been very involved in Afghanistan. I don't think that involvement is going to stop anytime soon, but I don't think anyone's going to invade Afghanistan to fight the Taliban anytime soon. I don't think anybody wants to pick up that buck at the moment. I will say, though, that right now there are reports when it comes to the idea that, well, okay, then it's all over then. Not necessarily. There are reports about resistance happening right now in the Panjshir region with the former vice president of Afghanistan, now declaring themselves to be the true president, and that they are currently in Afghanistan and in that region. There is the son of the, what is his name? I believe it is the son of a famous Mujahideen fighter. I think Ahmad Massoud is now talking about his resistance, and he's walking around in like video footage online with like soldiers in this region. They have like hung the flag up of resistance in the area, but
about that one.
This is like one or maybe two provinces. The Taliban has control of the vast majority of the country. Yeah, much is not going to come.
I'm as I said, domestic policy is more what I focus on in general because I'm an American and I see my duty as a citizen to be knowledgeable about politics. It is a very important responsibility. So I did kind of, I haven't watched these videos yet, and I'm very much learning through them too. And if I'm very much open to changing my positions on a lot of these issues. It seems like such a chaotic topic with so much disinformation and bias, and I'd love if people engage with me.
For that, the question now for me is seeing the Taliban govern, because the Taliban, from the entirety of its existence, has never held the majority of the they've held the majority of the country, but they never held the entirety of the country. They've never had to govern the entirety of the country. They've never been in a position like this before. They've always been a resistance group, and it's always interesting when you see resistance groups like govern, because there's always a really good chance that once they have to sit in front of a desk and they're not just shooting at people, except of course the firing squads, they're like, oh, wait a second, how does this work? And then everything goes downhill, and then
oh, sorry, I forgot. I'm still getting used to switching, but it's good, I think, to do this and then that. Whoop, there it is. Yeah, Dylan's making a point here I really hadn't thought about. It's a good one.
Violence can spiral out of control.
Yeah, I've been wondering about that, because it seems like there's a decent possibility with this kind of relatively uncontested control that the Taliban, not to say they become good, they won't, but that they try to more or less adopt the mannerisms of a government, and that they start.
Yeah, when the Taliban existed in 2001, they didn't have this giant infrastructure that's been built for 20 years to govern. So this really is like the idea that nothing has changed, everything is just pointless nihilism, black pill, blah, blah, blah. It's ridiculous. I mean, we could have done much better. There's a chance to do better in the future.
Negotiating with other countries and forming.
Well, they have to be a government. They have to be a government. They're most likely going to negotiate with China. For example, Taliban officials have met with Chinese officials before. That's already happening.
Yeah, but like, to what extent do you think they're capable of adopting the role of statecraft, of transforming from like a ragtag militia with control over the country into what is effectively a successful coup, into being the leaders of a functioning, relevant country?
It's difficult to say, because they've never really completely been in this position. They were only when the Taliban was the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan in the 90s. They were only ever recognized by 2 countries. So internationally, they don't have much experience in this. I think they're trying to build the foundations of this right now by declaring like, oh, we'll be nice to the women, we'll be nice to this. And you see like the New Zealand Prime Minister saying, we're going to call on the Taliban to be chill with women and be Yas queens. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to wait for the next few months to see what's going to happen before I can give you any conclusions, because I don't have much to be a basis off of. But I will say that there's going to be, no matter what, a significant population in Afghanistan that is going to look at the rules and regulations that the Taliban put into place when it comes to women's rights, when it comes to how they treat minority groups, when it comes to any of these things. They're going to see this, and they're going to treat them terribly. And what's going to happen is there's going to be a significant amount of Afghans who in the last 20 years, some significant, most certainly women, they're going to see this change in like in cities and areas that were traditionally held by the government, and they're not going to be very happy. The Taliban.
It's interesting that we're 40 minutes in and a 44, that's crazy. And they haven't talked about what is the Taliban's stance on capitalism? What is their stance on welfare? What is their stance on economic development? I mean, it's interesting. I mean, aren't these questions that we should be asking at this point?
The majority popular support is going to come from, of course,
not necessarily because we should like them more, but should that become an understanding why so many Afghanis seem to be okay with them, even if they don't like their more aggressive policies?
The Pashtun population, because they are a Pashtun organization, they've always have been, they always will be, and from rural communities. So it's going to be interesting to see them run big cities again and see how that interacts. But again, we have to wait a few months to make any determinations.
It seems like one of the worst things that could happen is if they gain enough legitimacy to start forming trade deals with other countries like China, you know, or that China like comes in to invest in infrastructural redevelopment. And at that point, the Taliban becomes cemented enough as like the de facto official government of Afghanistan that any attempt to challenge them would like start sort of fraying at the edges of China or other countries as well. And then it's like, oh God, at least before, like Afghanistan was a somewhat independent, the Taliban was like a fairly okay target for American or anyone's like opposition, but now it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess it's an international incident if they're contested and their rule gets extended out decades and decades because it's impossible to put pressure on them on the outside.
Look, my two best case scenarios, which are both very, very unlikely, is the first one is apparently Panjshir is like the most defensible position in the world and they take up and everything's wonderful. My second one is that the Taliban actually are Yas Queens now apparently, and they do all these trade deals and they actually advance on human rights, both of which I might as well just be like sending letters to Santa about. Because if they do become Yas Queens, then wonderful, like do your trade deals, do all of this. But I mean, there's no practical reason to stop these trade deals or to do many of these things. So we're just gonna have to sit and wait and to see how the next few months advances.
Praying for
do our best to
Queen
highlight
Taliban.
A Yas Queen Taliban. Yas Queen Taliban. Yep.
Oh, that's the most we can get. Thank you.
Yeah, pray for the next months and hope that none of the Afghan girls' robotics team gets executed.
Thank you for coming on, Dylan, in these dark times.
Yash, inshallah.
Inshallah. I'm sorry that as always, the online left has managed to disappoint in its acknowledgement of foreign affairs.
Yeah, I gotta say that this is something that has made me
I'm here to change that.
Watching the situation go down. And just for everybody at home, please contact your representatives about the refugee crisis. Please push to the United States to accept as many refugees as physically possible. And do not forget that once we leave Afghanistan, that does not mean Afghanistan no longer exists.
Also, please vote in Democratic primaries. Why don't people say that all the time?
Afghanistan still exists, people still exist, and their suffering is real and legitimate, and that a line on a map, made up, imaginary, that's what a border is, a line on a map does not dictate somebody's moral consideration.
F yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
Okay, now the final. Let's see more from Dylan and then Hunter Avallone. Avallone. He is a reformed conservative. Flirted with the alt-right, but never alt-right, thankfully. But now he is a social democrat, I believe. Democratic socialist, not sure, but he's in that sort of territory. I'm not actually sure how Dylan identifies. I personally am a progressive because I think that's a very umbrella label, and it allows the idea of progress and new information changing the specifics of my beliefs about how politics and how the world should operate. But let's get into this.
Hey Hunter, how's it going?
Hey Dylan, what's up, man?
Everything's been great in the DylanBurnstv world. I have more fans than ever. Don't worry about it.
Hey man, I'm really excited to have you on because I'm used to you being a moderator, and usually you boss me around, but now I get a chance to boss you around.
We gotta look at Hunter.
I'm excited. Okay?
Yeah.
Just treat me like Mike and it'll be fine.
Yeah, right.
Can I ask you a question about that before
I wouldn't
anything
do
else?
that to my.
Can I ask you one question before we talk about Afghanistan about that conversation? Just one?
Yes, I don't care. What's
okay.
Up?
Did you hear him when you made the joke about him saying
oh my god.
When you said, I don't want you to come over to a place, you might punch a couch, and then he said, I might punch something.
Is this the same guy?
Yeah,
What the fuck was that? Was he?
It is.
it sounded.
This is
You know what?
This
The
is
thing
how I
is
remember him looking.
when you're in the debate, you know how it is when you like you miss shit like that
And this
sometimes.
is-
But at the same time, I was
This is
like,
how he looked.
I didn't want to get because
Right.
I couldn't tell if he meant it that way or not.
Sorry.
I don't know.
You
Oh,
know, you
God,
don't know.
I'm sorry.
It's
I mean,
impossible.
I've
But
never
I
heard-
mean, it didn't
That's-
sound
Okay,
good.
let's
That's
go
all I'm
back
gonna
a
say. It didn't
little.
sound.
When you're in the debate, you know how it is when you like you miss shit like that sometimes. But at the same time, I was like, I didn't want to get because I couldn't tell if he meant it that way or not.
Mhm.
I don't know.
It's a little.
You
Loud.
don't know. It's impossible. But I mean, it didn't
That's
sound good. That's all I'm gonna say. It didn't sound good.
Yeah, that's the point. Hiding behind the memes. That seems to be the theme of today's episode. But yeah, man, I appreciate you coming on. This probably won't be that long of a conversation. Just for a little preface here, I'm very woefully uneducated when it comes to foreign affairs. So, do you want to give a little bit of a rundown for my audience here on
Oh, God,
like
this
I know
could be
you do
super
stuff with foreign
basic.
policy, correct?
Yeah, I don't call myself a foreign policy expert, but
He doesn't call himself that, but
I
Also,
have
this is a
advised
timestamp, I
two
don't
congressional
think.
campaigns. I studied international relations, and I'm finished my degree at the University of Maryland. And I currently work not as in a foreign policy capacity, but I do work in a form under the former ambassador of Romania, which I do hope after reading this book and hopefully getting to talk to him more that I get to learn more about his experience about foreign policy. And I've tried to do some independent research a lot myself, so I care deeply about foreign policy issues.
Okay, very cool. All right, cool. Well, let's just jump right into it. I'm just gonna ask a couple questions, and that'll probably be it. I did get one from a chatter as well that we'll probably get into. The first one is
Couple
like,
questions.
just generally speaking, what I know that Biden
25
took the
minutes.
troops out of Afghanistan, and now what's escalating here? What's happening, and like what could Biden have done
This
differently?
could be too big.
So when it comes to what Biden could have done differently, first I'll get to that after like saying the situation.
Shit.
So Trump made an agreement
Remember
with the
to
Taliban
switch.
around 2018, 2019 after a lot of negotiations about a withdrawal from Afghanistan. This was a reversal of his early term policy of escalating violence against the Taliban, increasing drone strikes to huge proportions, and of course famously dropping the Moab, the mother of all bombs. Some people argue that that was a negotiation tactic, but if it was, it did not work well in negotiations since the Taliban basically conceded nothing and didn't even agree to a ceasefire. They just agreed to negotiate a ceasefire later. They did, but the Taliban basically did that so they could not have to sign a ceasefire and do exactly what we just saw happen, right? So the negotiations occur, and eventually we agree to leave in May. Now, the May deadline was a little concerning to me for a few reasons. Number one, I was concerned about if we would be able to do all the processes correctly to take all the refugees out in an orderly time, if we had passed legislation and gone through the proper processes to make sure that everybody who could be at risk in Afghanistan, who assisted us to get them out of the country, because I believe that anybody who assisted us, and if we can take as many refugees as possible, we should be.
Those are some rough beards, man. But that one looks real good. Of course, my beard. Well, my beard doesn't look too bad.
Be doing that. That was my first
What do you
concern.
think?
My second concern
do you
is that I do think there are things that the Biden administration could have done to increase the confidence of the ANA forces, or at least give them a fighting chance, which not only would have made the withdrawal better if they had a more fighting chance, more will to live, and then we wouldn't see the situation we have right now, but it also could have given them a more legitimate chance at resisting. And even if the Taliban do take over, it could mean there would be maybe more resistance in general, or they would have to concede more, or the odds of them negotiating, even from a position of power, would have been more likely. This complete and utter takeover of most of the country, even if there is some resistance now in the Panjshir region, would not have been so total and complete. Some of these things that I think should have been done is more grounded negotiations about where our trade when it comes to arms was going to happen, and updated military equipment, since there's been equipment problems within the military. Seeing if it would be possible to do some quick moves on corruption. Now, these quick moves would not have had an immediate impact when it comes to corruption in the military, but have been very important to giving people a will to fight, since corruption is one of the main problems people have with the ANA government, and it could have been a good will booster. I say like will to fight. And another thing I was not happy with, and this is one of the big concerns of a lot of people who are looking at the situation and actually.
If we can't enact campaign finance reform and ban stock trading in Congress and all sorts of other things that are corrupt in our country, how the heck are we supposed to do it in a country we've invaded?
Actually like listening to the people on the ground is that the Air Force did not have the capability to replace spare parts. They did not have the parts necessary to maintain their Air Force, and they did not have the expertise in order to repair it. So even if they had the parts, they didn't have the people in order to rebuild those, to repair their Air Force. And without air power, which is one of the main advantages the ANA had in the last 20 years over the Taliban, and that was because we.
What's it like to be the one Taliban guy with glasses, you know? Like, he looks a little like awkward. Like, are people judging me? Are they thinking him for
assisted them directly with the American Air Force, one of the most effective air forces in the world. Without those skills and tools necessary, they had a huge advantage that they were supposed to have completely almost out of their arsenal. And so I would have said either longer term agreements for military contractors on repairing those vehicles and making sure they had the equipment necessary. People could tell me it's expensive, and I'll bite the bullet on that. I don't think it would have been that expensive, but I think it would have been totally morally justifiable and would have made our withdrawal go a lot better.
You know, I think Dylan has a lot of awesome stuff that he has doing the research, but he's like kind of not seeing the forest for the trees. He's saying, well, there's all these nitpicky things, but like fundamentally, the only way that we have success is if we entirely reoriented our own government, and then once that happened, apply that reorientation into Afghanistan. That was the only hope, and I think it would have been worth it to try to just stay there and see if we could do it, but maybe not. Maybe the Taliban would have caused mass death and suffering if we stayed. It's hard to say.
And those are a lot of the problems with the withdrawal. Those are just a few. I could talk about what went wrong with the Afghanistan war more broadly, but that's a bunch of woulda, shoulda, coulda. Even what I'm talking about now is woulda, shoulda, coulda. Now all we can really do is do everything possible to accept as many refugees as we can.
Okay, so that actually knocks out two birds with one stone right there, because the chatter question, if I'm not mistaken, from the donation here from Maze was, do you think the U.S. should accept Afghan refugees?
I think we should accept, and I've been questioned about this by like Rob Noor and others, like, oh, Dylan, is this really your position? And I've said I 100% unequivocally say that we should accept as many Afghan refugees as physically possible.
I agree.
Okay, and then when it comes to the thing with Biden, because people
actually on that, can I read you something quick?
Shit, I keep forgetting to switch.
Okay, 1 second. This actually is really it's some testimony from an Afghan pilot who served in the ANA, and they served for 15 years in the ANA, and they served.
Here's the same thing again. Progressives and liberal have said we need to get out of there, and they haven't focused on changing the way we handle Afghanistan. They just say there's no intervention never works. Intervention never works. Intervention never works. We gotta get immediate withdrawal. And then liberals were like, well, we've been there for 20 years. We've done all we can do. We gave them this wonderful neoliberalism. Why don't they love it? And then conservatives are like, they're just, who knows what they love Trump that did it, but now it's a chance to own Biden. So who knows what their actual belief system is? At least the Republican politicians probably would have been fine staying there, having a war and getting the military industrial complex. But then, that would have gone against Trump, and maybe they thought things were going to go better. Understanding the conservative politicians' motivations, like, it's such a serpentine. Oh, what a wicked web we weave when first we do dissemble and deceive.
It was 66 to 70% polling in favor of the withdrawal. And Biden, politically, reversing that would have been terrible for the midterms, even though I'm just saying political calculus. I'm not saying the moral. This is completely separate from the morality of the decision. He was not going to reverse it for that reason. It's a popular move to do, and reversing it, him biting the bullet and saying, never mind, we're going to reverse this, would have been extremely unpopular and hurt him so much politically. And it probably would have just kicked the ball to the next administration to just do it now with even possibly more chaos because of how little people would trust an American withdrawal that time, and our troops could have been in more danger because, oh, you just negotiated another withdrawal? Well, last time you said that, so we're just going to keep attacking your soldiers. And so it was politically unviable, would have hurt ability to negotiate with the Taliban. And think about how this would have made the...
I just looked it up on my phone, and it was like, I'm trying to find out if the Afghanis want us to leave, but literally every poll in the first page of Google results is about whether we want to leave, because that's who matters, right? Oh, America, now that we've left, now we wish we hadn't, but whatever.
I do have another question, maybe a little bit of a wrap-up question here. What's the deal with everything going down with Mike from PA?
Okay. So what happened is I posted something that says the fall of Kabul will be much worse than the fall of Saigon. And the reason why is because the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army did not want to marry off 15-year-old little girls and reverse women's rights. You can talk about like similar human rights abuses when it comes to things like maybe torture, but they're not to the same extent when it comes to things like women's rights and other stuff. And the Taliban has a marked history of brutality that I think is distinct. That is distinct from a lot of other organizations in the world.
But they do both want autonomy of the country. So, I mean, Viet Cong did, and the Taliban clearly does.
World and other organizations that we fought in the past. So I believe it would be much, much, much worse. That's basically the tweet I made, and he said no. And we went back and forth, and he just kept making so many historical errors after so many historical errors, just accepting nothing. And he basically refused to say for almost like 3 days that the Taliban was bad. And then when he finally did say the Taliban was bad, 10 minutes later, he said that the Afghan government, the ANA, was the most evil force in Afghanistan. Now, I don't know where you would list the most evil organizations in Afghanistan, and I know the ANA has a lot of problems with corruption and the Bachis and all these other things, but saying that says something about the Taliban, doesn't it? Because it should be obvious to anyone, it's the Taliban, or for your really hardcore foreign policy experts, ISIS in Afghanistan. But it is the Taliban, and anybody with 2 brain cells should have been able to say that. So it made me rethink whether he really cares that much about the condition of Afghanistan.
I'm pretty sure it goes like Afghan government, Taliban, ISIS. Like ISIS is ISIL, whatever you want to call them. Even the Taliban executed the leader of the Islamic State, and good riddance. I don't know. No, not good riddance. The capital punishment is wrong. It's a huge issue. It should have been carted away.
And women, and he basically dismissed all concerns. They brought that up with basically like that's like mainstream media CIA talking points. And then he criticized me for.
He actually wait. Did he actually say it was CIA or being hyperbolic?
Well, he actually did say that I was using a CIA front organization. And the proof he used is that this organization used to have CIA ties.
Basically, people like Mike from PA are hucksters, swindlers, idiots. I don't know. Take your pick. No idiots. No ableism in this videos. In these videos, no ableism. He is ignorant, very ignorant person. Willfully ignorant too. And yeah, he likes just getting into fights with prominent people. He also just loves having terrible takes.
And then he basically clicked their financial documents and scrolled through it and said, that's interesting. It didn't even like show. He said, that's a lot of money. Where'd they get that from? And then it was done. I was like, okay, buddy. And then after that, he cited the CIA, incorrectly, mind you, to counter me. He said, we didn't help Afghan women at all in Afghanistan, which I don't think we did enough, but the rights of Afghan women most certainly have improved in Afghanistan since the invasion. But he cited a CIA information in response to me, which number one is hypocritical, but number two,
he suffers this fallacy that so many people that disagree with America, which is like everything the American says, you have to do the opposite. I mean, anti-vaxxers do that. Isolationists do that. It's just, the CIA said it. Well, then we have to just believe the opposite. It's ridiculous. I mean, obviously, you can't believe everything the government says, but the idea that like it's a reliable metric to just believe the opposite of everything the government says is just freaking. It is just so wrong-headed.
He cited statistics from the year 2000. Now, I don't know what you know about 9/11 and the war in Afghanistan, but 9/11 happened September 11th, 2001. We didn't invade Afghanistan in the year 2000. Those statistics were from before our invasion. So you can't use those statistics to show that, to comment about the literacy rates of Afghan women. I can actually send you one of the clips if you want to see it, of him messing up.
Oh my God. Did he not realize it? Or did he?
He did not realize it, and he's not. I don't think he's commented on it since then.
I don't think he's going to.
Here's a short I made about it. I'll
did a CIA front organization.
Oh my God!
I'll cover them like
it's not worth our time.
Like exactly when they dropped on December 6th of 2019, right? But then he doesn't even read the own articles he's using on stream because if he did, he wouldn't have cited the CIA.
This is what he
Even
wants.
90% of Taliban attacks don't kill civilians. The problem is with that analysis is what he's talking about is an intercept.
Oh my God! They can't
read with.
No one cares. Okay, there we go. Oh, look at that smile. Okay. Well, there it is. My first video. I'm sorry for all the snafus. I'm going to try to edit out as much nonsense as possible. Again, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. I want to hear you down in the comments. I'm sure since I'm not popular, I can just answer everyone. So Thank you for watching.